Torah teaches us about the disease called tzarat. The principal cause of tzarat was slander, but the affliction was also a punishment for other forms of antisocial behavior, notably bloodshed, false oaths, immorality, pride, robbery, and selfishness. The punishment for the metzorah, someone with tzaras, was that he had to be separated from the rest of society. In the situation the world finds itself in, we're all living separated from the rest of society. And I think this would be a very good time to take stock of the relationships in our lives. The time of Sefira between Pesach and Shavuot is a time when we try and improve those relationships, the relationship of Adam lechavero, man and his fellow, our fellow children. Our fellow means our parents, our spouses. During the time of the Sefira, all 24,000 Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva passed away, each because they didn't respect each other. They didn't give kavod one to the other. And from this terrible punishment we can see how essential, how vital it is that the way we treat other people. I'd like to share with you a story about how careful we have to be with the feelings of others and how much damage we can do, Khalila, if we're not. There's a story about a young man, shortly before his marriage, he went to see a great Talmud Chacham, a great Torah scholar, and he said that he'd something to tell him that weighed heavily on his mind, something that even the day of his marriage would not atone for. He said, I grew up in Yerushalayim when food was a luxury. Nobody even knew what a banana looked like. One day the Rabbi went out of the classroom for a few moments and he left a few coins on the stender, a few pennies. I was so hungry. And I took the money and I put it in my pocket. The Rabbi came back and immediately saw the money was gone. He made the whole class stand in a line facing the wall, and one by one he checked our pockets. So quickly I dropped the money into the pocket of the boy who was standing next to me. When it came his turn, he couldn't believe that the money was there, and he started to cry. He pleaded with the Rebbe and told him he hadn't stolen the money. Of course, no one believed him. After that, he got a name of being a thief. And not much longer after that, he dropped out of the cheder, and bit by bit, he went down and down until he dropped his Yiddishkeit, his Jewishness, his religion completely, and became totally secular. Even though the day a person gets married is a day of atonement, a Yom Kippur for him, how can I ever atone for what I did to that poor boy? The Torah sage said, this reminds me of something that happened to me when I was also in Cheder. The Rebbe also made a stand in a line facing the wall, and when he found the culprit, he didn't let on who it was, but he simply put the money back in his own pocket. And when he got to the line, he said, Tov, everybody turn round and let's all say together, Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'noshuva chadesh yomeinu kakedem. Bring us back to you, Hashem, and we'll return. We'll do tshuva. As it happens, that little boy who took the money went on to be one of the great Torah scholars of the age. He said to him, look, you're not to blame for that other boy dropping out. You were young, you were hungry, and that fellow himself, Hashem, will understand what he went through and judge him accordingly. The person I'm really concerned about is the Rebbe. Through a moment's lack of judgment and sensitivity, he ruined someone's entire life. Our actions have echoes. Our actions have echoes. Rabbi Simcha Auerbach once said, grandchildren are the prize you get for not killing your own children. But sometimes even your own children can give you nachas. A friend of mine told me a story about one of my sons, and that gave me a lot of nachas. He told me that on the first day that his little boy was going to Cheder, so this little boy got onto the tender, the bus, and he sat down, and after a few moments he started to cry. So this friend told me that my son, who was a few years older than this little boy, came over to him and he gave him a sweetie, a candy, and asked him what his name was. The little boy calmed down, and my son gave him a smile. So this friend told me now that they have a family tradition that on the first day of Cheder, all his boys get onto the tender with sweets and candies for the little ones. that's their first day. Our actions have echoes. There was a young fellow from a religious family in Bnei Brak who decided one day that he'd turn his back on God, on religion. He moved out of home and into his uncle, who was Chiloni, who was secular. He moved into his uncle's apartment in Tel Aviv, a stone's throw from Bnei Brak, geographically, but as far as Mars, religiously. Time went on, and this young fellow met and fell in love with a non-Jewish girl. He got engaged to her. Now this was too much even for his secular uncle, and he became very angry with him. However, in spite of all the uncle's efforts to get the nephew to cancel the wedding, the nephew was determined to marry this fiancée, this non-Jewish girl. The uncle at least was able to convince his nephew at least he should go home and tell his parents face to face what he planned to do. The young fellow agreed, and he agreed to go back for Shabbos, for Shabbat, provided that his parents agreed to his conditions. His conditions meant that he spent most of Shabbat night, Friday night, chilling on his parents' porch with a cigarette in his mouth, and Shabbat morning he was out there again using his iPhone. In the afternoon his father came over and asked him if he wanted to go with him to a shiur, a Shalashudas given by Rav Aaron Leib Steinman, Zeichet Tzadel Livracha. Surprisingly, this fellow went. Now after the shiur, his father brought him over to wish the Rav a good Shabbos. His father told Rav Steinman that his son was no longer Shomer Shabbos, and Rav Aaron looked at the fellow and asked him, "How long is it since you kept Shabbos?" 2 years, the young fellow said. "During that time, did you ever have any thoughts of tshuva?" "Yes," he said, "about 4 times." "And how long did each of those episodes last for?" "About 10 minutes. Said Rav Steinman, so it comes out that in the last 2 years, you had 40 minutes of B'mokom Bali Tshuva Ein Tzadikim Gemurim Omdim Sham. For 40 minutes, you were on a level higher than the tzaddikim. For that, said Rav Steinman, I envy you. Good Shabbos. The young fellow returned to his uncle's apartment in Tel Aviv, but Rav Steinman's words wouldn't let him rest. He cancelled the wedding. One thing led to another, until today, Baruch Hashem, he returned to Avodas Hashem. People asked him what made him want to go to Rav Steinman's shiur in the first place. There he was sitting on the porch playing with his iPhone, puffing cigarettes opposite the windows of the neighbors. He answered, when I was in Kita Dalet in Cheder, my class went in to be tested by Rav Aaron Leib. The Rabbi asked that we should be given simple questions, easy questions, and so Rabbi Aaron Leib asked us questions that everyone could answer. When each boy answered his question, Rabbi Aaron Leib gave him a candy. And when it was my turn to go in, he asked me an easy question, but I didn't know the answer. So he asked me an easier question, and I still didn't know the answer. So he asked me an even easier question, and I still didn't know the answer. While everyone was leaving with their candy in their hand, Rabbi Aaron Leib gestured to me to come over to him. He said to me, in Torah, in Yiddishkeit, we get reward for effort, not for results. All the other children, they tried to answer one question and they received one candy. You tried to answer 3 questions, so you get 3 candies. And with a smile, he dropped 3 candies into my hand. Our actions have echoes. As parents and teachers, we have to be so careful to use only the voice of Yaakov, the Kol Yaakov, to encourage and inspire and give love through our words and not to turn them into the sword of criticism. Yadayim Yadei Esav. In Parshas Devarim it says, Elo del Masher diber Moshe el Kol Yisrael be'eva hayardein. The Sefer Tzitzim u'Parachim says that the word Eva has the same letters as Orev, meaning sweet. As teachers, as parents, we must make those Elu Devarim, those words of Torah, sweet for our children. I was also thinking that our relationship with our fellow man, be it our our children, our spouse. Our Ben Adam Lechavera also impacts on our relationship with the other two relationships we have in our life, with Hashem, with our relationship Ben Adam Lamokom, as it's called, God and man, and our relationships with ourselves, which is called Adam La'atzmo, man to himself. A friend sent me an email, and it made me laugh. It went something like this. For those of my generation who do not and cannot comprehend why Facebook exists, I'm trying to make friends outside of Facebook while applying the same principles. And therefore every day I walk down the street and I tell passers-by what I've eaten, how I feel at that particular moment, what I did the day before, what I will do later and with whom, and I give them pictures of my family, my dog, and of me gardening, of taking things apart in the garage, watering the lawn, standing in front of landmarks, driving around town, having lunch and doing what everybody else does every day. I also listen to their conversations and I give them thumbs up and tell them that I like them. And it works just like Facebook. I already have 4 people following me. 2 police officers, a private investigator, and a psychiatrist. Well, I lolled, as they say nowadays, when I read that email. But after reflection, I thought to myself, how very sad are the superficial relationships that pass for friendship on the brave new web. As we said, a person has 3 relationships in this world, with others, with Hashem, and with himself. When a person doesn't have a real relationship with other people, he just friends them in a superficial way, then his other relationships will also become impacted by that superficiality. He'll friend Hashem. There's no real relationship. There's no sense of commitment or consequence. He just dials it in. He phones it in. He phones in his davening. He phones in his avodas Hashem. And he just friends himself. He's not really in contact with who he really is. He loses his self-respect, his tzuras ha'odam, his divine image, which makes him a man, and he becomes debased and closer to the animals. The first Beis HaMikdash, the first temple, was destroyed because of 3 cardinal averas, 3 cardinal sins. They are shvichas domim, murder, avodah zarah, idolatry, and gilui arayas, sexual immorality. These 3 cardinal sins represent a breakdown in man's relationship with his fellow, with God, and himself. Murder is the breakdown of man's relationship with others, quite obviously, the ultimate breakdown. Avodah zarah, idol worship, is the breakdown of the relationship with God. He puts other gods, Elohim acherim, in God's place, attributes powers to things where there is no other power except Hashem. And Gilui Arayas, immorality, is the breakdown of the relationship between man and himself. He becomes more animal, more bestial, and less of a human being, less of the diukno shel odom. I was thinking that the 3 patriarchs, the 3 avot, Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, stand in polar opposition to these 3 cardinal sins. Avram Avinu is the pillar of chesed, of man's relationship to his fellow man, of Adam Lechavero, because it was Avram Avinu whose tent was always open to the 4 corners of the world to bring in guests. Chesed is the polar opposite of murder. Kindness is the opposite of murder. Yitzhak Avinu, Isaac, is the opposite of idolatry. For Yitzhak is the Ola Tamimah, as Chazal call him. Yitzhak was prepared to become a korban, an offering to Hashem. As it says that the afaro shel Yitzhak munach lifnei Hashem tomid, the ashes of Yitzhak Avinu are constantly lying in front of Hashem, in front of God. He's the ultimate example of the avodah tamimah, the ola tamimah, the ultimate relationship of man and God, the polar opposite of avodah zarah, of idol worship. And Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, is the ultimate surah sa'adam, the ultimate picture of the way a man should be, because it is his likeness that is engraved on the kisei hakavod, the throne of glory. That mystical concept which we understand or we don't understand is the throne of glory on which Kaviyachal, so to speak, Hashem sits. It's Yaakov Avinu that the Malachim saw engraved on the kisei hakavod. It's Yaakov Avinu who represents the correct picture of man and his elevation above the beasts. And interestingly enough, it was the diukno, the face of Yosef HaTzadik, of Joseph, who saved Yaakov Avinu from stumbling with the wife of Potiphar in the Aveira, the potential Aveira of immorality. Davka, specifically, it was his face. Rav Meir Shapiro, who we just celebrated, founded the Daf Yomi, got together all the Gedolim of Europe for a photograph at the end of the Siyum of the first Shas, the first cycle of the Shas. And as he did this, half of them put up their hands in front of their faces. And he turned to them, he said, Rabbosai, my masters, a day is coming when it will only be your heilige punim, your holy faces, which will save a generation. The face. The face is the pnim. A few years ago, my daughter came home from school and told us that a teacher had taught us a medrash that in the days just before Mashiach, Hashem will stretch a rope from one end of the world to the other, and everyone will have to grab onto it, and he will shake it very hard. And only those with very strong emunah will be able to hang on. She said, Daddy, we have to find that rope. Where's the rope? Is it going to go through Ramat Eshkol? Will we be able to hang on? Right now, Hashem is shaking that rope. He's shaking our complacency, and he's going to shake it harder and harder. And yes, it goes right the way through Ramat Eshkol, it goes through Tel Aviv, it goes through Bnei Brak, it goes through your town, wherever you are in the world. The Shabbos table last week, the conversation got around to, if you knew that you only had 5 minutes to live, what would you tell your children? What would you pass on to them? And that same daughter said, I would tell them, children, fight for your emunah. I'd like to finish with this story. There was a poetry competition in London, and the competition was to recite Mizmor LeDavid, Hashem Roi, Lo Echso, the Lord is my shepherd, what they call the Lord's Prayer in the non-Jewish world. It was open to everybody, and there was a young fellow who got up and he started to say in English, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and he recited it so beautifully that at the end there was a pause, and everybody, just the whole hall erupted in applause. And when it came to the end, the judges stood up, and the main judge awarded him the prize. And he came up to the stage, and he took in his hands the prize in his hands, and he was just about to leave. Everything was about to finish when there was a little Jewish fellow who walked up, and he said, in front of the stage, he said, judges, excuse me, would you mind, please, if I could just say my version of the Lord's Prayer? And he got up, and everybody looked around, a bit embarrassed. What are you going to say to this guy? So he said, he got up on the stage, and he started to speak. And after about a line and a half, the whole hall, the whole auditorium went silent, and everybody started to cry. Cried and cried. He got to the end, he took a little bow, and he said, thank you, everybody. Got off the stage. So this fellow who won the prize rushed over to him, and he rushed out into the street with him, and he said, you take the present. You take the prize. It's your prize. There's no doubt about it. You take the prize, it's your prize. So this little Jewish fellow said, B'shum ofen nicht. You won the prize, you won it fair and square. I'm not going to take your prize. So this young fellow said to him, okay, but one thing I want to know, why was it that when I said, the Lord is my shepherd, that everybody cheered and clapped, and when you said, the Lord is my shepherd, everybody cried? And he said to him, I know the shepherd. We live in a world of tremendous superficiality. Our job is to know that there's a shepherd, and that everything he does is to shepherd his people Israel. May we see Yeshua's Be'eref Ayin. Thank you very much.